It was a crisp morning in Washington, D.C., the kind that carried a hush of tension beneath its polished skyline. Brigadier General Danielle Monroe stepped out of her government-issued vehicle with the fluid grace of someone who had commanded troops across continents. Her uniform was flawless, decorations aligned with precision, service ribbons gleaming against deep navy wool, the silver eagle on her epaulets catching the sun like a quiet salute. She looked every inch the officer she was. A two-star general with nearly 3 decades of service to the United States. She adjusted the files in her hand, exhaled calmly, and began walking toward the federal complex. She was running slightly ahead of schedule for a high-level classified briefing, a rare window of silence before she would enter a room full of powerful men who would hang on her every word. But just as she passed the curb, the quiet broke. 2 uniformed officers approached, their eyes narrowing not with recognition but suspicion. One had his hand already resting on the hilt of his holstered weapon. The other wore that unmistakable smirk, half doubt, half disdain. Danielle slowed, her instincts flickering to life like they had in combat zones. Still she remained composed. "Good morning, officers," she said, her voice measured, polite but firm. "Can I help you?" The shorter one tilted his head and looked her up and down. "Where'd you get that uniform?" he asked, tone dripping with sarcasm. Danielle blinked. "Excuse me," she replied, not out of confusion but out of disbelief that this was happening again. "You military?" the taller one asked, glancing at her ribbons as if they were costume jewelry. "Yes," she said slowly. "Brigadier General Danielle Monroe, Department of Defense. I'm expected inside for a classified." The second officer cut her off. "Yeah, right. You got any real ID? Not this cosplay crap." His voice was loud enough that a passerby turned their head. Danielle reached for her badge and credentials, clearly displayed on her lanyard, her every move calculated not to provoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain the value of the National Defense Service Medal or what it meant to wear a Bronze Star. She simply held her ground. But they weren't listening. They had already made their judgment, not based on her record, her rank, or her voice, but on the color of her skin, the braids neatly tucked under her cap, the fact that she didn't look like what they had been taught power was supposed to look like. In one swift, dismissive motion, they turned her around and began cuffing her wrists behind her back. Her ribbons pressed against the cold metal of the squad car. Her files slipped from her grasp, scattering onto the sidewalk. A woman in a business suit gasped and stopped walking. Teenage boy raised his phone. Danielle didn't resist. She didn't protest. She simply stood there, back straight, eyes forward, letting them cuff the history and dignity of her uniform like it was a disguise. In that moment, beneath the sun, in the capital of the very country she had served, she tasted the old bitter truth that no rank, no ribbon, no record of honor could fully insulate her from prejudice. But she also knew something else, something those officers didn't. This moment, this ignorant theater of power would be very short, and its consequences would echo far beyond the sidewalk. From the back seat of the patrol car, the world outside blurred through tinted glass, gray concrete, the echo of footsteps, and the hush of bystanders too shocked to speak. Danielle Monroe sat upright, wrists bound, uniform creased by the friction of injustice. The hum of the squad car felt distant, as if the city itself had turned down the volume to listen. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, eyes calm, lips pressed into a quiet line of steel. With deliberate grace, she shifted against the restraints, tilting her shoulder just enough to reach the inner lining of her breast pocket, a movement she'd practiced 100 times in war zones, where silence was survival. And there, snug between reinforced fabric seams, rested a secure, encrypted satellite phone, authorized for emergencies of national priority. This wasn't how she imagined she'd ever have to use it. With fingers constrained and breath steady, Danielle activated the direct channel. A soft tone buzzed once before the call connected. Her voice, though low, cut through the line like a scalpel through fog. "General Royce, this is Monroe. I've been unlawfully detained. 2 local officers, Suspicion based on appearance. No provocation. I'm in full uniform. There's video. Civilian witnesses. Badge number 11842 and 13190. My location is 17th and Constitution. There was a pause. One sharp, solemn second of silence. Then the voice on the other end replied with the weight of thunder cloaked in control. Understood. Stay where you are. We're activating protocol. That was all she needed to hear. Within minutes, invisible systems began to move. A quiet storm unleashed beneath the surface of Washington's polished institutions. Homeland Security was pinged. The Inspector General's office was looped in. Legal counsel from the Department of Defense was briefed. A digital web of command and consequence began to stretch across city blocks, down government corridors, into the veins of agencies that usually slept during civilian affairs. But this wasn't just civilian anymore. This was a breach of military protocol. This was an insult to a decorated officer. This was federal. Back in the squad car, Danielle closed her eyes for a breath. On the other side of the glass, the officers were laughing, still unaware. One gestured toward her medals as if mocking their meaning, while the other tapped something on his radio. They were proud of what they'd done. They thought they'd exposed a fraud. But just then both radios crackled. An unfamiliar frequency, an urgent voice. Units 43 and 45, stand by for supervisor contact. You are ordered to remain at your current location. Release the detained subject immediately. The laughter stopped. The shorter officer stiffened, hand frozen mid-gesture. The taller one turned toward the cruiser, eyes narrowing as realization began to dawn. 2 minutes later, their sergeant pulled up, stepping out of his vehicle in a rush. He approached the car, and when he saw who sat inside, the color drained from his face like ink running off wet paper. "General Monroe," he stammered, voice caught somewhere between disbelief and dread. "Ma'am, I—" But Danielle was already stepping out, wrists free, adjusting her uniform with slow dignity. She didn't yell. She didn't gloat. Her silence was sharper than accusation. One of the officers stuttered toward an apology, words clumsy, heavy with desperation. Danielle simply raised her hand, a quiet signal to stop. "You don't apologize to save your badge," she said softly, voice low but unwavering. "You apologize when you understand what you've done." The sergeant stood still, nodding quickly, already on the radio to internal affairs. Around them, a crowd had formed. The bystander's phone was still recording. And that video was already halfway across the internet. Danielle didn't wait for paperwork. She didn't linger to lecture. She gathered her files from the ground, straightened her cap, and resumed her walk to the federal building. She would be on time for her briefing. Because when you wear stars on your shoulders and fire in your silence, justice doesn't come with noise. It comes with a single call, made with calm precision, that turns ignorance into consequences. And Danielle Monroe had made that call. The ripple from that single phone call spread faster than any rumor or headline could. Within hours, the sterile walls of police headquarters felt heavier, charged with a tension that clawed at the fabric of command and pride. The officers, once smug, certain of their power, were now shadows in a storm they hadn't seen coming. Their radios remained ominously silent, their movements constrained by the weight of impending scrutiny. News traveled like wildfire, reaching the ears of city officials and federal agents alike. The mayor's office issued a terse statement condemning the incident, while the chief of police was forced into an emergency press briefing, words rehearsed but trembling with the knowledge that their institution's credibility was cracking under public pressure. The video, raw and unfiltered, showed everything. The dismissive smirks, the harsh grip of handcuffs on a decorated general's wrists, the steady calm of Danielle Monroe as she endured a humiliation no uniform should ever invite. But the city wasn't just watching. The Pentagon was watching. And that made all the difference. Within the Pentagon's cold, labyrinthine halls, the report was clear and uncompromising. This was no mere bureaucratic misstep. It was a violation of federal law and military protocol, a glaring act of racial profiling and blatant disrespect toward a high-ranking officer whose service record spanned nearly 3 decades. The Department of Defense's legal division moved swiftly, marking the incident as a breach of operational security and an affront to the values they swore to uphold. Back on the ground, the 2 officers were placed on immediate administrative leave, a euphemism for being sidelined, their careers hanging by a thread. Internal Affairs launched a full-scale investigation, cross-referencing the recorded footage with Monroe's official credentials and witness testimonies. The evidence was irrefutable, a damning catalogue of misconduct amplified by the public's growing outrage. But it wasn't just punishment that followed. The fallout ignited conversations long overdue about bias, respect, and the blind spots that lingered in law enforcement culture. Mandatory training on racial sensitivity and military protocol was swiftly proposed for every precinct, a small but significant step toward accountability. Through it all, Monroe remained a figure of quiet strength, never once seeking the spotlight, never succumbing to anger or vengeance. She fulfilled her duties with an unshakable resolve, embodying the dignity that had been questioned but never broken. Her message was clear. Power isn't about retaliation, but about using truth as a shield and a weapon for change. The officer's eventual dismissal was not just a personal victory but a symbol, a clear warning that prejudice disguised as authority would no longer be tolerated. Monroe's legacy was no longer just about her rank or medals. It was about the profound reminder that true respect must be earned, never assumed, and that justice demands more than uniforms and badges. In that charged aftermath, one undeniable truth shone through. A single call from the back of a squad car had shifted the course of many lives, turned a moment of injustice into a turning point for a system desperate to be better. And Danielle Monroe, standing tall amid the storm, became the living embodiment of that change. The moment the Pentagon was alerted, the gears of a vast and powerful system began to turn with unyielding force. It was as if a silent alarm had been triggered in the heart of the nation's defense apparatus, an unmistakable signal that something profoundly wrong had transpired, demanding immediate and uncompromising response. From the hushed corridors of military command centers to the austere offices of federal oversight, a chain reaction of swift, decisive action unfolded, leaving no room for delay or denial. The Pentagon's leadership did not hesitate. Major General Monroe's call was not just a report. It was a declaration that would ripple through the ranks and the bureaucracy alike. The Department of Defense swiftly coordinated with Homeland Security, the Office of the Inspector General, and the legal authorities within the Defense Department. Each agency activated protocols designed for moments of crisis, transforming what might have been a quiet internal review into a high-profile investigation with national implications. On the streets where the incident occurred, the police department found itself suddenly under an intense microscope. Orders crackled over radios commanding immediate supervisory intervention, halting the actions of the officers involved and mandating the release of the detained general without further delay. Within minutes, the sergeant in charge arrived, his face pale with shock as he confronted the reality of the situation. A decorated 2-star general, standing tall, cuff-free and composed, yet undeniably wronged. The officers who moments before had acted with arrogance and dismissiveness were now stripped of their presumed authority, forced into a humiliating position of accountability. The mayor's office and the police chief faced public scrutiny like never before. They issued statements pledging full cooperation with the federal investigation, their words heavy with the weight of political pressure and public expectation. The footage captured by bystanders, raw and unedited, quickly spread through social media, igniting a firestorm of public outrage and sparking widespread calls for systemic reform. The narrative was clear and powerful. This was not an isolated incident but a glaring symptom of deeper, entrenched biases that had long plagued law enforcement. Within this crucible of scrutiny and response, the Department of Defense's stance was firm and unequivocal. Major General Monroe's dignity and service record commanded respect, and any breach of her rights was intolerable. The military's official channels moved swiftly to ensure that lessons were learned, policies reinforced, and that the officers involved faced not just administrative consequences but a clear message that such conduct was unacceptable at every level. Beyond the punitive measures, The incident became a catalyst for change. Initiatives for mandatory racial bias training and education on military protocol for law enforcement agencies gained momentum, reflecting a broader commitment to confronting uncomfortable truths and fostering an environment of respect and professionalism. The system that had once appeared rigid and unyielding now showed a capacity for self-examination and reform, a promise that the pain of this moment would not be wasted. Throughout this intense whirlwind, Major General Monroe remained a figure of quiet dignity and unshakable resolve. She did not seek vengeance or public sympathy. Instead, she embodied the principle that true power lies in grace under fire, in using one's position not to retaliate but to illuminate injustice and drive lasting transformation. Her call to the Pentagon had set in motion a powerful response, one that transcended individual careers and reached toward the very ideals of justice and equality the nation strives to uphold. In the wake of this profound system reaction, it became clear that this moment was not just about correcting a wrong. It was about rewriting the narrative of respect, accountability, and the relentless pursuit of fairness in the face of deeply rooted prejudice. The aftermath of that painful encounter could have been a story of vengeance, bitterness, or public spectacle, but Danielle Monroe chose a different path, one carved by resilience, dignity, and an unyielding commitment to change. She understood that the true measure of her strength was not in seeking retribution against those who wronged her, but in transforming that injustice into a catalyst for systemic reform. Her quiet resolve spoke volumes louder than any outcry or protest could have. In the days that followed, while headlines blared and social media buzzed, Monroe moved with a deliberate calmness. She returned to her duties without fanfare, attending her scheduled briefings, each step a testament to the power of grace under pressure. She did not seek the spotlight, nor did she indulge in bitterness. Instead, she used her platform, her rank, her experience, and her voice to champion a cause far greater than herself: the urgent need for accountability, education, and cultural change within law enforcement. Monroe collaborated closely with the Department of Defense and advocacy groups to launch public service campaigns aimed at dismantling stereotypes and educating officers nationwide about military protocol and racial bias. Her message was clear and uncompromising. Respect is not optional, and uniforms, whether military or police, must be honored equally. She pushed tirelessly for mandatory training programs, knowing that true reform requires more than disciplinary actions. It demands a transformation of hearts and minds. Her stance was both firm and compassionate. She acknowledged the deep wounds left by years of systemic prejudice, but refused to let anger dictate her path. Instead, she embodied the principle that justice is most powerful when it is wielded with integrity and vision. Monroe became a beacon for those who had been marginalized, reminding every Black woman who had ever been doubted or dismissed that their presence in any room was not just rightful but necessary. Through her advocacy, the conversation shifted. The officers responsible were not just punished, they were held accountable as part of a broader reckoning within law enforcement agencies. Training and reform initiatives gained unprecedented support, signaling a move toward greater equity and respect. Monroe's leadership demonstrated that true power lies not in force or retaliation, but in the ability to inspire lasting change from within the system. Her story was no longer about a wrongful arrest or a humiliating moment. It was about courage, dignity, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. Danielle Monroe showed that the greatest victories are often those won not with fists, but with unwavering principles and a relentless commitment to reform. In choosing reform over revenge, she changed not only her own narrative but the course of countless lives yet to come.